Ben, fantastic to get you on Real Vision.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you. So
this is going to be a lot of fun because I think what you're up to is going to kind of blow people's minds, and I just think it's really exciting. So before we get going, you've got an amazing story of your career. So let's go through that first because I think it's amazing.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm the author of, I guess, 23 or 24 books at this point. Two of them, became big movies. And so those are the ones that people have read of mine. One of them was Bringing Down the House, which became the movie 21 about the MIT blackjack team. And then the other one was The Accidental Billionaires, which became the movie The Social Network about the founding of Facebook. But I never really set out to be a nonfiction writer. I wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. And I was trying to do Michael Crichton type of writing. I was trying to be like a big thriller writer, and stumbled into a true story. And so I kind of just fell in with the MIT blackjack team.
How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Boston. So, as a kid, my parents had made a rule that we had to read 2 books a week before we were allowed to watch TV. So starting at the age of 12, I had become a speed reader so that I could watch like Three's Company, not for And so I was always wanting to be a writer. And so when I graduated from college, I was in Boston and I wrote like 9 novels in the first year out and was rejected by everyone. And it wasn't until I'd written a thriller that was a little bit better that I sold my first book, but it didn't do well. Nobody read it. So there was a local bar in Boston, and a friend of mine who was the woman who ended up being on the MIT blackjack team, and in the movie 21, she was portrayed by Kate Bosworth. She introduced me to her friends. She's like, this is a group of people who are going to Vegas every weekend. And I started going with them. And I was blown away because when I first met them, they looked like regular math science guys, but they had tons of money. And it was all in like $100 bills. And you never see $100 bills. At least, I mean, in Boston, you don't ever see $100 bills. So I wanted to know why, and that's how I fell in with them. And so they showed me this kind of secret thing they'd been doing where they used math to beat blackjack and had won like $6 million. And I was blown away. So that became my first nonfiction book and became my first successful book. And so I became a journalist, not on purpose, but because the first story I found that actually people read happened to be true.
And what made you decide to write that story? Just because it resonated so much with you? What was that thought process?
Yeah, I'd always been I'd been coming up with stories of my own. And I wrote for the XFiles. I was writing kind of pop sci-fi kind of stuff. And I was always, my eyes were always open to things that might be interesting. And I was kind of blown away by the idea that these people who were super smart, they weren't criminals. They weren't doing anything that was really illegal. They were just using math. And it was just a kind of a cool authoritarian, just using your brain to beat the system. And I think I've always been attracted to that, the idea that there are these systems set up that you feel like are against us, right? There's these walls you're always trying to climb over. And when a smart person figures out a way over it, it hits something inside. It's a very kind of
because attractive. Everybody thinks I could be that person.
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to sort of find a way, a secret. I've said this before, but one of the things that has always intrigued me is the idea that there are these doors in life that we just walk by all day long and we never look inside. And there could be something really cool going on back there. And that's the story I'm always looking for. What is this thing we've walked by a million times? And, Vegas, casinos, we all know what they are. And there's this group of kids who might be sitting at the same blackjack table as you, right? But they have this secret that allows them to win. And so that it just intrigued me. It was mind blowing to me that it was real. And what was really cool is they hadn't told the story yet. Nobody had heard this story yet. And so I was able to get inside and just be a part of it. So it was awesome.
And then that became a screenplay as well. And
it became the movie 21.
When did that happen in this story as well? Because now you've gone from kind of struggling writer who's finding his feet to suddenly you've written a book that's become world famous, and then suddenly it ends up being a movie.
Well, it actually happened backwards. So the book was not expected to be a big book. I had sold it for a very little amount of money. The first printing was going to be 12,000 copies, which was not a big print run. No one had any expectations because this was before Vegas was hot. Vegas didn't get hot till Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker, and everyone started to sort of, talk about Vegas again. And cards were not hot. There was no cards on television in 2001. Nobody cared. What happened was I wrote an article for Wired magazine about the MIT blackjack team to try and promote the book. And Kevin Spacey read it. And so back then, that was a good thing, right? Now it's a different feel, right? But back then, Kevin Spacey read it, and the phone rings. I picked up the phone, and it was Kevin Spacey.
No
and he's
way.
like, his assistant had found me, and they were like, "We want you to come to LA. We want to make this into a movie." And I didn't believe it was really Kevin Spacey. I remember hanging up on them and trying to figure out who this assistant was to see if it really was Kevin Spacey's assistant. But it really was. And so Kevin really just read the article and said, "This is a movie I want to make." And, in Hollywood, if you have an A-list actor, and at the time that's what Kevin was, who says, "I want to make the movie," it kind of opens all those doors. And so that's how it happened. It was out of the blue. It was kind of a weird situation because I flew out to LA and I was like, "Okay, you're going to make this movie. This is great. And how much are you going to give me?" And Kevin and Dana, his production head, were like, "We're going to give you nothing." And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "We offer you zero, but we're going to actually make this movie." And I went to my agent at the time and I was like, "They're offering me zero." And he's like, "Well, let me see what else is out there." And we actually got an offer for like $750,000 from another studio because they had heard Kevin was interested. And so I went back to Kevin and Dana. I was like, "Okay, there's other people offering me $750,000. What are you going to offer me?" And they're like, "Zero. We're not going to give you any money right now. But if the movie gets made, you'll get some money. And also you can go on talk shows and talk about how we're going to make this movie." And so I ended up taking zero, which my agent hated at the time. And I went out and I ended up doing the Today Show. And that just exploded the whole book. And that just started my whole career. So sometimes taking zero is the right move. And it was the beginning of my nonfiction career. And 21 got made. And, from there, I became the guy that every college kid who'd done something crazy would reach out to.
Really?
I started getting emails. I started getting phone calls. Just anybody who'd done something cool would pitch me their story. I was getting dozens and dozens of pitches a week. Eventually there was Twitter. I started getting pitches. I was getting pitches. It was just a continuous stream of stories. And that's how the social network started.
Tell me about that one.
Yeah. And random email at 2 a.m. A kid at Harvard said, "My best friend founded Facebook and no one's ever heard of him." And this was back in 2007 or even before that. This was before Facebook was anything. I mean, it was, a couple 100 million people were on it. It wasn't the monster that it is today. I had heard of it, but I'd heard of a guy named Mark Zuckerberg, but never anything else. There was no other stories about Facebook. And so I went out to for a drink with this guy, this college kid, and he walks in with his friend, and his friend was Eduardo Saverin. No one had ever spoken to Eduardo. Eduardo was in the midst of this lawsuit. He was suing Mark because Mark had cut him out entirely. He wasn't even on the masthead. There was no mention of him. And he proceeds to get drunk and tell me this story, at 2 a.m. in a bar about him and Mark and how they created this company and about the Winklevoss twins. And I was blown away. I mean, this was a great story. And so the first thing I did is I reached out on the internet. I found the Winklevoss twins on Facebook. And so I reached out to them. I was like, "I'm thinking about doing this story."
There's an irony for you, right?
Yeah, isn't it? I know. It's a good thing Mark wasn't watching at the time. And so they started to talk to me. And so the Winklevoss twins and Eduardo, and I had a whole bunch of other kind of sources. And so I wrote a 14-page book proposal. And I took the book proposal and I sent it to my agent, and it ended up leaking onto the internet, onto Gawker. So Gawker.com back then was a big deal, printed my entire book proposal. Wow. And that day, everything just went crazy. Facebook settled with Eduardo because he was in the midst of this lawsuit for what became $5 billion. And on the top of the settlement agreement, it says, "You may never speak to Ben Mezrich again." Really? Because they were trying to stop this book. And it turns out, I didn't know till at the time, Eduardo had only come to me to force Mark to settle. He didn't really want a book written, I don't think. I don't think that was the plan. The plan was, I'm going to squeeze Facebook, and, this is what's going to happen. And it did work for him. He got his billions of dollars. And he cut off all contact with me. He broke up with his girlfriend because he was dating my wife's best friend. He moved to Singapore, never to be heard from again. But I had enough, information to get going. And that same day, Aaron Sorkin read my book proposal online and was like, I want to make this movie. And David Fincher read it online and said, I want to direct this movie. So they all call me. It all happened literally in one day. And I was like, holy crap, this is the best day of my life, except for I hadn't actually written the book. So I locked myself in a hotel and I spent the next, 11 weeks writing Accidental Billionaires. And Aaron Sorkin came to Boston and I was handing him chapters as I went. And he wrote The Social Network. And, the next month after I finished the book, and within a year, we had a movie, which is crazy. I mean, the timeline, never is compressed like that. So that was another huge accident and mistake, just fell into it and just changed my life again. So that's how most of my big stories have happened. It's just I fall from one story to the next as people pitch me things, as I look at things, and it just kind of works out. So
your crypto journey starts with you then writing about the Winklevosses. Talk me through that.
So it really starts there. It starts with The Social Network. Is I meet the Winklevoss twins, the Winklevi, right? And I met them in a hotel room in New York. And I remember they walk into the room and I'm like, there's my bad guys, right? They look like every 80s movie that you've ever seen. The giant blonde guys, who are chasing the Karate Kid around the gym. They're the bad guys. And I grew up with 80s movies. I was obsessed with all of those movies. So I was like, so when we wrote The Social Network, really, they were one note. I never saw them as anything other than the big jocks who were chasing Mark Zuckerberg around campus. And they were very helpful. They gave me so much information in terms of how I wrote that book. But, and I stayed friendly with them. There was no kind of, but I didn't think much beyond that. I thought I would never hear from them again. And then a couple of years later, I guess a number of years later, reading the New York Times, and there was that great, I think, Nathaniel Popper article, and the title of the article was "The Winklevoss Twins are the first Bitcoin billionaires." That was the headline, and I was like, "Really, the Winklevoss Twins?" And I'd heard of Bitcoin, but I didn't know anything about it. People had been coming to me for years, being like, "You should write about Bitcoin. You should write about Bitcoin," but I was never interested because I'm not a math guy at heart. I don't understand the blockchain, or I didn't then. The word blockchain, I just hate. I think it's a horrible word. It just makes your eyes glaze over. Everything about it was not thrilling to me. But then the idea that the Winklevoss twins are in the middle of this, that was intriguing. And so I went to New York and I was like, guys, I got to talk to you. What the heck is going on? And they were nice enough not to be mad about The Social Network. So we sat down and they were just kind of building Gemini at the time. So I started hanging out with them. I spent, 6 months to a year just shadowing them around. And learning everything I could about Bitcoin and crypto. And then I met Charlie Shrem and Roger Ver, all the other characters in Bitcoin Billionaires. And I wrote Bitcoin Billionaires. And that introduced me to this whole world. And from there, I got to NFTs because the whole time they were always talking to me about, what's going to happen. What they're really big believers that crypto changes everything. They believe in this whole, the idea that everyone now is going to have power in finance. The idea that the NFT was important they started telling me about that. And so that's kind of where my journey ended up. It was really via the Winklevoss twins.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.